South Africa's new coalition government didn't just happen. It was negotiated in smoky back rooms, WhatsApp groups, and of course, late-night meetings. They all shaped the future of our democracy and our country. And in her fascinating new book, The Deal, award-winning journalist and broadcaster Mandy Wiener takes us inside those rooms, revealing who held the power, who blinked first, and what was really promised behind closed doors. Fam, I just want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode, Pace Car Rental. Use promo code SMWX and make sure you show Pace some love as they're showing this channel some love. Now, let's get into the episode. Mandy Wiener, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX and thank you for this great book.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure. Before we get into the substance, which is truly fascinating because it's a first very deep account of what happened to bring us this government, talk us through the methodology and who you spoke to in the lead up to this book so that you could put the pieces of the puzzle of this coalition negotiation together.
So I think the genesis of the book, firstly, was the fact that I, like you, wanted to know what was going on inside the rooms. And I believe that every South African has a right to know what was going on inside the rooms, considering the politicians were negotiating our future as a country. So I felt that I wanted to know the backstory, what was going on in the bilaterals and the back channels as well. So I set out trying to speak to everybody. I wanted to speak to all the negotiating teams, all the members, so not just the leaders of the political parties, but the actual people who were getting down to the brass tacks of it and really trying to find a deal. So I reached out to almost all the political parties. I was obviously restrained by time and other things as well. So I didn't speak to every single political party, but I wanted it to not be pro-GNU or anti-GNU. So I also wanted to track the progressive caucus and speak to the EFF and MK. But I tried to speak to as many people as possible. And in the end, I interviewed 25 politicians, almost 100 hours of interviews. And I think it gives a full picture.
What did you learn in speaking to those politicians and seeing some of the personalities up close?
I think the perception maybe that we have of politicians is that they are egomaniacs or that they are primarily after power. I think, as Gaten McKenzie said to me, that absolutely it's about power. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this. But I really wanted to tell the human story as well. And I was surprised by how vulnerable a lot of the politicians were, how exposed they were about their emotional torment, the enormous pressure that they were under at the time, the lack of sleep, and how they were doing something that was entirely novel. Nowhere else in the world do you have 14 days to negotiate a coalition in the way that our leaders had to do. And when they speak about that, I think that's the thing that really struck me.
Absolutely. And I mean, the coverage is broad. You spoke to the president, various members of the ANC negotiating team, DA, and representatives of most of the political parties across the spectrum.
Yeah, that's right. The only party I couldn't speak to that I really wanted to speak to was the EFF and the MK party. I did speak to Advocate Dali Mpofu, who gave me a good sense of what was going on
in both.
In both at the time. He was at the Rock in his capacity, of course, in the EFF, but also as the lawyer for MK. So he gave me a sense of the build-up around the progressive caucus and what was happening there. But I tried to speak to Julius Malema, I tried to speak to Floyd Shivambu, to Jacob Zuma, and unfortunately I had no success there.
You did get to speak to the president. Talk us through that meeting, because at the start of the book you say that you managed to get him just before the book went to print. And of course, that's a fascinating perspective to have been able to have canvassed, so soon after all this happened. But it also gives us a really useful historical record.
Exactly. And that's why I felt that it was so important to have the president's voice in this book. I was about to go to print. We were literally 2 days away from print. And I got a message from Vincent Magwenya, the president's spokesperson, saying, 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, get Teddy to stand in for you on my radio show.
May her soul rest in peace.
And he said, it's the only time I can do. Meet me at the foundation. And I was very surprised by the fact that he gave me almost 90 minutes of his time.
Wow.
And the reason I felt it was so important was, in many ways, this will be his legacy. In what he was able to be the architect of. And although he wasn't directly involved in the negotiating team for the ANC, I very much think that he was the strategist behind it. And when he began speaking about the tactics, the strategy, invoking CODESA, the lessons from CODESA, how he ran the clock down, the leverage that he used, I think it was crucial to have that interview with him.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a fascinating graphic in your book. There are a number of pictures that come to life the more you read the book. But it was who made up the negotiating teams. And one thing that struck me is how many people were on the ANC's negotiating team and how seriously they seemed to take the negotiations. And their negotiating team outnumbered every other party's quite significantly. So they really brought every possible resource to these negotiations.
So they had a technical team that was David Makura and Kekana, Phoebe Porkita, Kobule, and a number of other people as well. But then they had the broader negotiating team, which was a number of the top 7 and NEC members. And it became very broad. And there were instances, for example, on the 14th of June, when the president was being elected, where members of the NEC were actually deployed to go and babysit leaders of other political parties to make sure that they voted the way that they wanted them to vote. But if you look at the real technical team, the work was largely done by David Makura and Phoebe Porkita Kobule. And that's why Phoebe Porkita was brilliant in her insights, the diary that she kept, the analysis. But what was interesting was that the ANC didn't prepare for the reality in the same way that the Democratic Alliance had. The Democratic Alliance was literally scenario planning. They were role playing. They met at Tony Leon's house. John Steenhuisen speaks about election day +1, election day +5, election day +10. Jordan Hill-Lewis was role-playing. They were saying, what does this scenario look like? What do we do if this happens? And the ANC wasn't prepared in that way.
Take us into the results center, because a lot of this flows from the earthquake that happened in that results center in the transition from May to June. How do you think the key role players reacted and responded to the results that the South African public delivered on that day?
Well, there's that very poignant image of Gwede Mantashe in his tracksuit staring up at the election results board, and clearly, evidently, being completely thrown by what the results were and how they were coming in. Nomvula Mokunyani was very visible from the ANC side, and she spoke to you about this. She spoke to me about this as well, about how she was really shocked, the betrayal that she felt with the results that were coming in, and you could get the sense of that on the floor of the Rock. If you remember from previous elections, it was always Jesse Duarte, the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, who took on that role of reaching out at the Rock, of going to chat to other political parties. And interestingly, in Nomvula Mokunyani's office at Luthuli House, there's a portrait of Jesse Duarte. And she said she very much followed that strategy of Jesse Duarte's, where she felt responsible for going to reach out to other political parties. Food played a big role, going to eat pizza with the Freedom Front Plus. They brought a big bag of food, or a cooler of food, and how that was shared. And it was very, very important, because that laid the foundation, the groundwork for what would ultimately be the formal negotiations.
And speaking of which, if we can move on to I broke it into 2 phases, kind of the election fallout to the 14th when
Yep.
Ramaphosa was elected, and then the 14th to the 30th when cabinet was finally announced. And that month felt like about 6 years.
Oh.
But one theme I just wanted to take a step, because I must say, I followed this daily, but I realized I knew so little about what was happening. And your book lifts the lid on what was happening. The first thing that just stood out for me was where these conversations were happening. These opulent guest houses in Westcliff, the Inanda Club, Pallinghurst, owned by this South African business person, Adi Eindhoven. Even the EFF, all of this happened in these very elitist spaces, and I just found that quite shocking and jarring, that the ANC was based at the Inanda Club of all places.
Well, this is the great irony, right? Is that you have the future of 62 million South Africans, many of which are impoverished, the highest Gini coefficient in the world, and the future of the livelihoods of South Africans being negotiated in these venues of opulence, very emblematic of colonialism. So the ANC chose the Inanda Club as its venue. And so I went to go to the Inanda Club to go and have a look, and they were very nice and showed me around. But when you walk in and you walk up the stairs, there are literally portraits of red-coated horsemen. There are images of military platoons and in their cavalry, all of their uniforms. It is deeply ironic, watching the horses trot past below and the skyline of Sandton. And then a number of the negotiations took place at Adi Eindhoven's home on the Westcliff Ridge at Pallinghurst. And that is spectacular. It's this glass solarium, and it's on the Westcliff Ridge. And even the EFF and MK, those meetings took place at hotels in Sandton, in Waterfall, in Four Ways. So it is deeply ironic that this is where the future of the country was negotiated.
Yeah, taking us into those settings, I think, was a phenomenal contribution of the book. And Pallinghurst, to me, seems to be a very important place in all of this. Firstly, take us through who Adi Eindhoven is and what the significance of Pallinghurst was and the significance of the meetings there. Starting, I believe, from Enoch Godongwana meeting with Helen Zille and John Steenhuisen, and various other meetings that happened there.
So Adi Eindhoven, of course, comes from the Eindhoven family. His father was a politician as well. So, I mean, the great full circle moment.
UP politician.
Politician. But the great full circle moment is when the business fraternity met with the ANC in exile in the 1980s. Adi Eindhoven was invited along to watch and to witness that negotiation take place because of his father's role in the UP. The family is a very wealthy one. They have a stake in Hollard, in Nando's, and he, of course, is very involved in the Operation Vulindlela B4SA work as well. So he has very deep connections within the ANC, but also within the DA. So the fact that was the venue was just a coincidence. He also played a role as a intermediary, as somebody who operated in the back channels. So while it was the venue for the negotiations, largely that was because of Tony Leon's relationship with Adi Eindhoven's wife's family, but Adi himself also played a role. I mean, he's described by Fikile Mbulula as a patriot. Helen Zille calls him a Mursa lekker oak. So he was the kind of person who both sides felt comfortable with, and using that as a venue was seen as neutral in a way.
So there's this opulent guest house in Westcliff, probably the most elite suburb in Joburg, or one of them, and ANC and DA have a lot of meetings there. Talk us through some of the important meetings that were held there. I mean, well, maybe we can start with the one, because there was this very interesting dinner where, among others, Godongwana is there and Zille and Steenhuisen are there. And that seemed to be quite an important moment where the two sides started sharing information. I think it was on the eve of the NEC, which was about to sit.
So this was very early on. It was before there had been one or two talks about talks, or as Fikile Mbalula referred to them as whispering sessions that had taken place. And this dinner was at the Enthoven's house with Eddie Enthoven and his wife, and with Enoch Godongwana, the finance minister. And this was a dinner over oxtail with a roaring fire. John Steenhuisen describes it as the best oxtail he's ever eaten. But most importantly, it was a discussion about, remember at the time, the ANC was deeply divided over what to do, which model to follow. Do they do a confidence in supply, or do they go full coalition? And from what I understand, Enoch Godongwana was encouraging the DA to stay in the fight, to make sure that they what would ultimately become the last man standing strategy from the Democratic Alliance. And the way that Helen Zille describes the last man standing strategy was that they believed that ultimately the EFF and MK would exclude themselves and the DA would remain there and would be the coalition partner. And from my understanding, Enoch Godongwana was pushing the DA towards that. I did try and interview him. I sent him a long list of questions.
Welcome
and
to the club.
Yeah. Because I felt it was important for him to respond to that, because if you also remember, shortly after that, when the NEC meeting happened, there were reports coming out about how he was one of the role players in pushing the ANC towards a DA coalition, and he denied that. So I thought it would have been important for him to give more clarity. And then, of course, the whole budget thing happened. And I think that's why he was so upset about the fallout with the DA over the budget, because he had been one of the proponents of an ANC-DA coalition.
Yeah, and I must say, it seemed like he was sharing some quite important information with Steenhuisen and Zille at that meeting about where different people were standing within the ANC, where the different factions were. And that was quite something to me, I must say.
Yeah, and that's why I would have liked to have his version of it, which I did try to get. We only have Helen Zille and John Steenhuisen's version of that meeting. But this speaks to what was going on in the back channels. And a lot of the media coverage is around the bilaterals, the meetings that were taking place. But I think we should not be discounting the back channel work and these little meetings that were taking place between individuals that ultimately resulted in what we got.
So the DA and the ANC are slowly finding each other. The ANC has this NEC meeting where they kind of agree they're not going to go ANC-DA, but they want to have some kind of multi-party arrangement. And up to that point, it seems MK has been out of the picture.
Blue ticking.
Yeah, exactly. Green ticking, maybe. Yeah. And then we have this EFF-MK moment where there's this fallout between the ANC and the EFF and MK quite early on. Take us through that process, because that has fascinated a lot of people. One would think the EFF and MK, having come out of the ANC, were the most immediate partner for the ANC, and yet the conversations between them, such as they were, didn't go very well.
Yeah. So General Bantu Holomisa actually says that in his initial engagements with the ANC, he said, just pick up the phone, get Cyril Ramaphosa to pick up the phone and phone Jacob Zuma. You're the obvious partners to go together. There had been this development of a progressive caucus, a potential voting bloc on the far left that was trying to organize itself. So it did seem like the obvious option. But within the ANC, the conclusion was to rather go for a government of national unity, which was ostensibly a government of national unity, but many said was actually a coalition. Yeah. In fact, Dali Mpofu was saying that he believed, it is quite strange to refer to him.
Yeah.
Like, how do I refer to him?
I don't even know. Yeah, sure.
His argument throughout when I interviewed him was that actually this was always destined to happen anyway, that the MK and the EFF felt like the ANC was always going to go with the DA. So the whole negotiation was kind of pointless.
Yeah.
But the ANC was adamant that they wanted to bring MK and EFF in as well. The MK meetings never happened for those first 14 days or so.
What was going on with, like, it seemed like MK just wasn't there.
They weren't organized, and the secretary generals kept changing. There wasn't any kind of organizational structure. So for that reason, I think they just didn't have people that were mandated. Then, of course, they did send Tom Moyane and Nhleko to negotiate at a hotel in Sandton. And then the EFF meetings, the first one between Floyd Shivambu and the negotiating team of the EFF and the ANC was relatively good. It was cordial. The second one was a blow-up of epic proportions from what it sounds like.
Absolutely. This was quite a turning point in the book, I felt, and take us into that meeting with ANC and EFF. Nomvula Mokonyane has spoken about it here. We don't have the EFF version, but it sounds like quite the meeting.
So we don't have the EFF version. I know that in response to Nomvula Mokonyane's interview here, Floyd Shivambu said there's a recording. So I was quite keen to get the recording so that I could get a sense of the reality of what happened. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. But speaking to Fikile Mbalula, Phoebe Porkita, Qubule, Nomvula Mokonyane, the president himself, by all accounts, what happened in that meeting was Floyd Shivambu was incredibly arrogant and said that we are going to destroy you. We'll join the GNU in order to destroy you and essentially rip you apart. And I felt that the ANC people that were in that room took it very personally. They were deeply affronted by this. They saw it as an act of disrespect. They were largely, I thought, magnanimous in the way that they were approaching political parties, particularly the smaller political parties. And they felt that the conduct of the EFF was totally offsides. And that was a big turning point in the negotiations because many of the ANC negotiators were done. They didn't want to engage again, although they did. They subsequently did have further meetings with the EFF. And that's why they were using it, and Dali Mpofu was saying that they were using it as a scarecrow. The fact that the EFF was always there, always hovering as a potential alternative, as the BATNA, as Helen Zille describes it, the alternative to a negotiated settlement.
Love the show? Rep the movement. Tap join right here to become an SMWX member now. Support bold African media. Join the fam.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is fascinating and fascinating how personalities and moments that affect people also then have this impact on the country. Let's go to, by the way, I mean, just for the audience, I mean, there's so many things so many interesting details. So we can only touch on them telegraphically here, but let's go to the 14th because eventually the ANC and the DA, with EFF and MK not being able to meet the ANC and find the ANC, are kind of in agreement in principle. And that agreement is enough to push through a very fateful vote on the 14th of June where Ramaphosa gets elected president. But there's a lot that has to happen between that in principle agreement, the statement of intent, and Ramaphosa being elected. I mean, that day was quite something.
And I've tried to get as much color from that day as possible. I mean, just the story of Helen Zille trying to sew with an enormous needle the bottom of her coat while trying to negotiate the clause around sufficient consensus.
Felt like an allegory there.
Exactly. So I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And I think we knew it because the clock was ticking down. And that was intentional. So, in fact, this is something that Tony Leon's always said, that he felt the ANC was constantly running the clock down. They didn't show up for meetings. They didn't show up for a big meeting at the Eindhovens. And Helen Zille sent a video of the food saying that she thought that would get them there. But the clock was running down and the pressure was immense. There was a lot of pressure from big business, people phoning Helen Zille, John Steenhuisen, Tony Leon, and on the ANC side as well, well. And the issues were around two clauses in particular, around sufficient consensus and around proportionality.
Yeah.
And there was to and fro. And the future of the country was negotiated over WhatsApp with terrible version control. Because you had these different versions flying up and down between Andri Snell on behalf of the president and Helen Zille. And they were having to negotiate over WhatsApp. They went in a room and there were different versions. And then the president would get involved and he would change a version. The proportionality percentage of 60%. So that was fascinating, the way that was playing out, because they did run the clock down. And I said to President Ramaphosa in my interview with him, I said, did you run the clock down? Was it intentional? And he just started laughing.
Well,
and he sat back and he said, thank you.
I have to find this part in this book, by the way, because there's this interesting moment where, just a little taste from the book, which I feel we actually have to get. You have this blow-by-blow account from 10 a.m. to 12:12 when finally the speaker's elected. And just like a little taster, 11:22, it's now down to the minutiae. Zille asks Nell to please include 19.3 parties to the GNU representing 60% of seats, not just parties. 11:35, Nell sends Zille another document. It's labeled final GNU statement of intent. 11:37, Zille tells Nell section 19 is now fine, etc. All the way through until they can't quite reach agreement. The clock is ticking. And then Floyd Shivambu, out of nowhere, says, can we have a 30-minute break? And this proves crucial to the whole thing.
The drama of this obviously is a journalist's dream, but it also helped that I had the WhatsApp conversations. So you really get a feeling of the pressure and how tense it was. And Helen Zille WhatsApping saying, don't let them schnei us. Those kinds of messages going up and down. And then in the cut and thrust of the politics and everything that was happening, Tony Leon apologizing to Helen Zille for a showdown that they'd had on the pavement the previous day, saying he's now a convert to signing. Because at the heart of this was that Helen Zille wanted a signed document. She was adamant. She wanted a piece of paper that had to be signed. And she wouldn't go into that vote for the president without a signed document. Ultimately, down the line, the ANC has largely disregarded the signed document. So it's formed, the net result is that she probably didn't need one, but she felt that she needed the signed statement of intent. And that's what was going on behind the scenes, was on these WhatsApp conversations. And then as it was about to all fall apart, Floyd Shivambu stood up and asked for a caucus break. And Helen Zille messaged John Steenhuisen saying, support the caucus break, we need the time. And it was that break that Floyd Shivambu asked for, that the Chief Justice allowed then, even though he was so reluctant, that gave the ANC and the DA that breathing space to be able to agree and actually get the document signed.
Quite amazing. I remember being in Parliament. It was actually the CTICC that day, and you could really feel the palpable tension in the air. And I spoke to one DA MP as I walked in, and I said, like, do we know? And he said,
no deal.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah. And there was no deal. Going into that sitting at 9 o'clock, there was no deal. And even while MPs were being sworn in, there was no deal. And I was about to do my radio show at 12 o'clock. And we started hearing murmurings at about 1 minute to 12, 2 minutes to 12. And as I went on air, the news broke. And it was so dramatic. I mean, this is the future of the country. It's the election of the president. And that speaks to how unreasonable the legislation is around this. That there's an expectation to do here in 14 days what it took Belgium 18 months to do. And in other European countries, other countries around the world, it takes literally years to negotiate a coalition.
Well, I would argue the coalition still hasn't been negotiated fully.
This is true. No, I agree with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, wow. So Ramaphosa's elected. We have all of this. By the way, I was thinking on that, and I remember the feeling I got when I was in the room was that because KZN had been agreed, everyone had assumed that national had been agreed. And that made the EFF queasy because they were like, oh my goodness, it looks like this thing has been, if they've got KZN, they must have parliament. And that's why they called for the break, because they were like, oh, now KZN, because KZN was called before Ramaphosa. But it turns out KZN was finished, but the national thing wasn't. Yeah.
And in fact, the EFF was still lobbying on the ground. So Gayton McKenzie from the Patriotic Alliance says on the floor that day, Floyd Shivambu came to speak to him. And, they do not like one another, the EFF and the Patriotic Alliance. And this was the first real conversation that they'd had.
Yeah.
And Floyd Shivambu asked Gayton McKenzie to vote for Julius Malema as president. And Gayton told him to take a hike. Obviously, we don't have Floyd Shivambu's version of that, but that says something, that the EFF felt that they could still get a deal over the line. And people like Mzwanele Nehonso from the PAC, who that morning was at a press conference for the Progressive Caucus at the Taj Hotel, and then on the floor was being convinced by Maropeni Ramakgopa and other ANC members saying, come with us, come with us. So there were still people that were teetering, that weren't sure which way they were going to go.
So we then have a president. Everyone assumes, okay, well, it's pretty easy from here, cabinet, and let's get moving with this government. But in some ways, the problems only began then, because then there was this whole 2-week period of figuring out the modalities of how this coalition was going to work and where the positions would be shared out. I mean, there was a clear disjunct, wasn't there, between what the ANC thought they should hang on to and what the DA thought they deserved, given the split of votes and the proportionality discussion.
I think this is where the real disconnect happened, was once the statement of intent had been signed, everyone thought that it was negotiated and settled. But in fact, there had been no agreement over the size of the cabinet, over the number of cabinet seats that would be allocated and how this would be decided. And I think this is where things really got a bit hairy, a bit tetchy, where I do think that the GNU almost fell apart. Or when I say the GNU, I mean the relationship between the ANC and the DA almost fell apart, where it came to the brink. There were instances where John Steenhuisen messaged Cyril Ramaphosa to say, great doing business with you, good luck, we're out.
Yeah.
And where there almost was an agreement to go it alone as a minority government. Or alone with smaller parties. So I do think that what happened around the cabinet positions was real negotiating, but also what we saw from the letters that were made public, just how confrontational and fractious it became.
Yeah, and your book made me revise my position a little bit. I came up with this adage that the ANC lost the election, but they won the negotiations.
That was the premise of the last few chapters, so you can't revise it now.
I know, yeah. We're in negotiations here, yeah. And I mean, you helped me to see that there were actually 2 key phases of negotiations. There was the phase up to Ramaphosa, where I think the DA would be quite happy with how that went, that they managed to wrest the ANC from the EFF and MK, and convince the ANC into this coalition arrangement that the ANC wanted to call it GNU, and the DA was like, call it whatever you want. But then after that, once Ramaphosa became president, that's where I think the ANC really outmaneuvered the DA.
Yeah.
Probably knowing that once we get the presidency, the power balance shifts. So maybe the ANC won the second half of the negotiations.
Helen Zille is going to be thrilled when she hears that, because when I posed this to her, I listened to your podcast, obviously. So this was something that I really wanted to interrogate. Was your position on this, the fact that the ANC had lost the elections but had won the negotiations. So I asked all the politicians that I interviewed that question.
Wow, really?
I did.
That's cool.
Because I thought it was an important conversation to have. So I asked every single person I interviewed that question.
And then my dad disagrees. What's going on?
Your dad disagrees with you. He says you got it wrong.
But I thought we always agree and we meet in some smoke-filled room to decide what happens on this podcast. Yeah. Anyway. But anyway.
So when I asked Helen Zille this question, I think she felt deeply affected by it. And she actually responded later that evening with a 3-page document answering the question and making the case for why she felt that the DA didn't lose the negotiations. And there's a few things that she sets out in that. The one is the time pressure and the position that they found themselves in.
Yeah.
The other one is that she argues who wins the governance. So she argues that it's one thing to win an election, it's another thing to govern well. And she feels that by the DA being in government, they have an opportunity to govern. And then she speaks about how far they could actually push the ANC. She speaks about the BATNA. And this is a term that's used in negotiating, which is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
Yeah. What are you prepared to walk away towards if you can't agree with someone else?
Exactly. And she felt that the ANC had 2 BATNAs. The one was a minority government. The other was an agreement with the EFF and MK.
Yeah.
And she says what happened in Gauteng showed that the ANC was willing to go with its BATNA. So she felt that if the DA pushed the ANC too far, they would agree to go with the minority government or with the EFF.
Yeah.
And they felt that they couldn't do that. So ultimately, she doesn't believe that necessarily. Most of the ANC people that I asked said that they do feel that they probably got more than they deserved. And that's they ultimately achieved President, Deputy President, Speaker of the National Assembly, Finance Minister, and in every
Durko,
police, and Durko was apparently the ANC was obsessed with Durko.
Yes, that's an interesting part.
Yeah, that the DA said that the ANC was obsessed with Durko
because they get funding from other governments and things, according to the DA. Yeah.
And that was the case made by Helen Zille and Tony Leon. So I do think that from the ANC's perspective, they got more than they deserved.
Yeah.
And I asked the president this question as well. And he, again, sat back, folded his arms and said, no comment.
I think it's obvious that the ANC was able to get way more than because what I think happened was the ANC realized that they could play the EFF and MK off the DA to get their optimal outcome. And they did so time and time again to get to a point where, as you say, president, deputy president, speaker, the entire security cluster, and some other ministries. And for the DA to walk away with and then there was the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition,
which was offered by the president and then withdrawn.
Exactly.
And I asked Ramaphosa about that as well, and he played that down, saying that it was part of the kind of cut and thrust of negotiations. The other important point to remember is that the DA says that they were working on the presumption of a certain size of cabinet, and they were misled by how big the cabinet would ultimately be and how many deputy ministers there would be. So in every portfolio where there's a DA deputy minister, there's also an ANC deputy minister. So I think that it's nuanced. It's quite complex, but I think it's an important question that you posed that I tried to answer in the book.
Wow, that's really cool. Then we had a government, and I guess my other set of questions would be around how you think this, what I maintain as a coalition.
As do I.
Yeah, exactly. How it has fared and what at least the early parts of this coalition look like in your mind. Because it's been a bumpy road, that's for sure.
I like to say it's a coalition draped in rainbow colours to make it look like a GNU. So I do think that it has been very tempestuous. I think, obviously, we know what happened around the budget, around various policy issues.
Yeah.
I do write about that as well, and I try and track the back channel negotiations around the budget, because although there was reporting on that, Peter du Toit wrote about that as well, which I picked up on. I think that the back channel between Kekana and Ryan Coetzee was very important around the budget and how that all happened. In fact, Kekana refers to Ryan Coetzee as Desert Storm, which Ryan didn't know about. So that's a nice little piece of information. But I think ultimately what we have at the moment is the Democratic Alliance as opposition in government. And that's the issue that Ramaphosa has. And he was very deliberate in what he said about John Steenhuisen and the Democratic Alliance, saying how disappointed he was in how the DA had conducted itself in the GNU, because they're acting as an opposition within the government of national unity. So it's a lot like an unhappy marriage where the parents are staying together for the kids.
Yeah.
And the kids are you and me. Because they realize that the alternative is too terrible to consider. And that's why they need to stay together. And because of the massive pressure from business and the markets.
The Andrew Whitfield moment also seems to have been a major area of contestation. What do you make of that? Because his post still hasn't even been filled, has it? Yeah.
And as I understand it, and I could be wrong, that the DA needs to propose a name, and that hasn't happened yet. But I'm not sure on the accuracy of that. But I think that, so we saw around Bella, we saw around land expropriation, and then budget as well. Then, of course, the Andrew Whitfield, the Deputy Minister of DTIC. So I think that there's been a lot of flux. And there have been many times over the past year where we felt that, as the media, that the GNU was over. And often people were writing about it as if the GNU was done. I never felt that way. I have consistently felt that the GNU will stick together. And even over the Andrew Whitfield issue, I felt that the DA wouldn't walk away. There are some within the GNU who are quite open, within the DA who quite openly say that they are in favor of walking away, and the DA is divided over this. But I've always felt the DA would stay in. I think the balance of power within the balance of forces within the DA is to stay in the GNU, to make a show of it, to really have an impact in those portfolios that are delivery portfolios. And I still think that it won't be a policy issue that will break the GNU. I think it will be a decline in support at the polls. So if the DA sees a massive decline in support of the polls, or if it is something so drastic it would have to be something extremely drastic at a policy level for the DA to pull out.
We've got this Mkhwanazi saga unfolding, and I would say that's probably been the biggest test of this government, of this presidency. It's the biggest scandal of the year.
Yeah.
And I'm watching this parliamentary portfolio committee, and I must say it lends weight to your suggestion, because I found the DA to be quite tame in this committee. I mean, they're not going for the jugular. Rather, they are talking about a factional fight in the SAPS and defending themselves in terms of what was done in that portfolio committee that Ian Cameron chairs. And I've seen them be far more strident in demanding accountability than I'm seeing them in the ad hoc committee. What do you make of my observation?
I'm not sure that that's intentional. I mean, if you think of somebody like Clinus Breitenbach, and I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think that's determined by the role in the GNU. I still think that the DA is acting as opposition in government, and they've been quite clear about that. But I also think that perhaps that's a side effect of them actually having seen this happen before. And that this is actually not anything new that we're seeing coming out of the inquiry in many ways. And it's more about getting the information than necessarily holding people to account, which ultimately should happen.
Yeah. I mean, what about the president? They're obviously not going very hard on Phala, that's for sure.
No, I agree with you. I don't think there was some kind of deal over a handshake. We won't go for you on Phala if we join the GNU. I certainly haven't heard anything like that. But I think there's probably a sense within the DA that, well, we're in this government, we'll be noisy, but we also can't be completely disruptive.
Yeah. And on the ANC side, what are your thoughts, having spoken to so many of the role players there? Because there's the question of whether the ANC branches themselves are happy. What do you think now? Because I've I mean, one other way for the GNU to implode is via an internal disagreement within the ANC against the GNU.
And that, of course, comes down to succession and
Yeah.
who succeeds Ramaphosa, whether it is somebody... A very interesting anecdote around Paul Mashatile, for example, that there was this other deal that was allegedly on the table, which was a deal that would see Paul Mashatile becoming president and Ramaphosa being recalled, and Floyd and Julius Malema and Gayton McKenzie as deputy presidents. And Gayton McKenzie told me the story about how Paul Mashatile invited him and Kenny Kunene to lunch. And at this lunch, actually, they were so surprised because Paul Mashatile was advocating for them to stay in the GNU and not do a deal, this alternative deal potentially. And they walked out of there saying, hey, here's this guy, we think he's busy with a palace coup, but actually he's pushing us to stay in a deal that would see Ramaphosa become president. So I think people are unsure about what Paul Mashatile's view on the GNU would necessarily be. But I do think that if we continue to see low economic growth and unemployment increasing, and in Cyril's economy, the kind of lived experience and cost of living that we're seeing, I could see at a grassroots branch level a growing dissatisfaction with the government that could ultimately escalate to a potential leadership shakeup.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also interesting to me that I think I continue to maintain as well that I think the DA is going to do very well and the ANC is not. And we'll see what that means after 2026. But it's also interesting to me that I don't think the DA is getting a lot of heat for being in this government at this time of crisis. It's kind of like this is an ANC crisis.
Yes.
And very few people are saying, DA, do you want to stay in? As we learn that criminal syndicates could be running the government. They have been quite successful in insulating themselves from a crisis of government that is really being painted as an ANC crisis, largely because it's an ANC minister.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think they have, I think what they've deliberately tried to do is focus on delivery portfolios and try to make a big difference at Home Affairs through Leon Schreiber, through specific delivery department that they've taken on those portfolios and have remained very vocal through someone like Ian Cameron on policing. Yeah. And they are straddling this role of being in government and still being opposition, where they can still be noisy on the issues and go to court and follow this lawfare approach that they've been following on the issues that South Africans are unhappy about. Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out post local government elections.
Definitely. I wanted to take you to the last paragraph of the book, because you say, ultimately, I believe that the true test of this unity government will be whether the citizens of South Africa experience and see a visible improvement in their quality of life, the economy, unemployment, foreign investment, violent crime, endemic corruption, day-to-day service delivery, and sentiment. In a country desperate to achieve its potential, we should demand nothing less. I mean, we're not there, are we?
We are not there. We're not there. The measure of success for the GNU government and what they've said is 3% growth and employment. We are sitting on 0.6% growth. We have a stuck economy. Unemployment has risen since the GNU government has come in. A recent Ipsos survey tells us that 8 out of 10 South Africans believe the government is moving in the wrong direction. That was the sentiment and the zeitgeist of the country was much more positive in those first few months after the GNU came in. And that's waning. And I think that if we do not see a tangible difference when it comes to economic growth, when it comes to employment, and as I say, violent crime is a perfect indicator. If we don't see a difference to those things, then I do think the government of national unity will lose support. But I think that there'll be no alternative because of the way that our democracy and our electoral system is constructed.
Finally, how do you think this book relates to some of your other work? You've done fascinating work in the realm of crime in South Africa, in the realm of the security cluster, in the realm of the Kebble murder. Where do you see this fits into your canon?
So when you look at the Madlanga inquiry and what we're seeing coming out there, my argument around the fact that actually it's nothing new is because the model has been replicated. So if you go back to Salibi, Kebble, Agliotti, and then you go to Radovan Krejcir and his network, and you look at Richard Mdluli over the years. I mean, I've been reporting on this for 20 years. I've written several books about this. In order for a criminal syndicate to operate, you require different elements. You require corrupt police, so high-level generals, but then also boots on the ground. And these are police officers that protect the syndicate, that you're able to leverage so that they can offer that protection. You then need wealthy business people with deep pockets who are able to cultivate relationships with the police officers and build those relationships. You need the politicians. And this book obviously is about that element when it comes to politics. But you need the politicians who also, through political patronage, offer protection. And then you need the actual criminals who are the button men, the shooters, the hitmen who carry out the executions, who do the dirty work. And in order for that syndicate to operate, you require all of those elements. So while in the past I've always focused on the network as a whole, for me, I felt it important to look at the politicians to get a better understanding of that and to find out what goes on within those corridors of power to better understand the full ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting because, I mean, what do you think is different about this syndicate which seems to be emerging, or if anything?
So I think that it's in structure, in the way that the syndicate has established, it's very similar to what we've seen in the past. That model has been replicated. What is different now, I believe, is the stakes. So I think that there's more at stake. I think that the value of the crime and just the kind of numbers that we're seeing. If you think about it, Jackie Salibi went to prison for 120,000 rand.
Those innocent times.
Exactly. So I think there's more at stake. And I also think that we're seeing a higher level of violence in terms of targeted assassinations and the hits that are happening. So I do think that the price is higher, both literally and figuratively. But the actual structure of the network is very much what we've seen. There's shades of Salibi, there's shades of Krejcir, of Mdluli, and we're just seeing... This is just the latest season of the soap opera.
Well, Mandy, Wiener, thanks for joining us on SMWX. Thank you for this fascinating book, which really takes us into the heart of these fundamental negotiations for our country, and for your great work as an author and a broadcaster.
Thank you so much, and I'm enjoying listening, so I'll keep listening.
Thank you so much. Like, share, subscribe, help us reach our next milestone of 400,000 subscribers. Make sure you pick yourself up a copy of The Deal by Mandy Wiener to get deeper insight into how the coalition government that currently runs South Africa was formed. And make sure you keep it locked on SMWX. See you on the next one, fam. Aye.
Na na na.